And hit record. So we are online. I got the thumbs up. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gene Jones. I'm executive director for an organization called CanEd, Cannabis Education. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is designed to assist with education in this space. If you will allow me, I'm going to make a couple of opening comments. David, if you can pop up my slides. We are doing this in person as well as virtually. So welcome those folks that are attending us virtually this morning. Allow me to make a couple of brief comments. First, housekeeping. I'm going to ask everybody to turn their cell phones off or vibrate so that we silence that. I know we had a couple of phones go off in the room yesterday, so I want to make sure that doesn't happen again today. Restrooms are down the hall for our in-person attendees, down the hall by the escalators and to your left. Conference support, if you need anything, just come out to the registration desk out front. Proceedings, I know I'm going to get the questions. Are we going to see, we're going to get copies of the presentations? Yes, you will. We'll compile everything into a PDF package, and I'll get that out to everybody along with the list of attendees, names and affiliations. If you're a VIP registrant, a sponsor, or exhibitor, you're going to get the full list. So with that caveat, if you do not want your information released, please let me know so I can extract you out of the database. Networking events. So we've got breaks will take place in the exhibit hall. We have a reception tonight. We have a Topgolf event, which is sold out at this point. So that event is from 7:30 to 10:30 tonight. Lastly, I've asked the moderators not to read abstracts or bios for our presenters because I sent that out to everybody in a compendium. So in essence of time, I'm going to cut down having the moderators have to do that. I encourage everybody to join the LinkedIn group for the conference. It's a great way to network and keep up. So that you want to do this, I'm going to send them, you're going to get these slides, so you'll get the links directly. So if you have time to do that, you'll be able to join the group. Lastly, with regards to CME credits, we are offering CME credits, ACCME credits this year. Through Dade County Medical Association and FMA. And I have to give a shout out to Dr. Block for assistance with that. Pretty elaborate process to have all those presentations reviewed, have to get disclosures from all the speakers. And you're going to get 10 point up, let me rephrase that. You're going to get up to 10.5, depending on whether you attend the sessions or not of CME credits. So if that is of interest to you, there is an extra charge of $100. We've got roughly almost 200 attendees for the event this year, of which about half are doctors, of which about a third at this point have signed up for CME credits. So if that's of interest to you, I encourage you to do it. As part of the presentations, we're going to ask everybody to give us feedback. So you're going to get this event. You can either do it now. I've got a Survey Monkey evaluation for all the presenters. Or you can do it post-event. I'll make sure that goes out to everybody with the proceedings so that you can, because I need your feedback. I need to know what you like, what you don't like. What are we missing? What do you want to hear about next year? And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn this program over. Our MC for this morning is Moriah Barnhart, who is an advocate and founder and CEO of CannaMoms. And I know she's well known within the community. Two people that are instrumental for this medicine. To my left, Moriah and Ron Watson, who I happen to know Ron for a number of years, going back to college. I'm going to let Ryan tell details about each one of them because I'm going to let them share their respective stories. So with it, I'm going to turn it over to Mo, let you run the program.
10 years after this journey started in Florida for many of us, at the earliest onset of legislative changes back in 2013 and 14, this remains today my favorite conference, which is saying a lot. And this is by far my favorite panel that any conference in Florida has ever had. With that, my own daughter, who last month celebrated 10 years of survival from her date of diagnosis, sitting here in the front row ignoring me. Largely, her success and her survival is due to cannabis. One of the first parents I met in Florida, fighting the same fight with the same amount of passion and for the same reasons, is Ron Watson, who I have the utmost respect for, whose dedication has never wavered, but whose fight was under very different circumstances than mine. I'm going to let him tell his own story, but I could not be more honored to be introducing another human being than I am to be introducing Mr. Ron Watson.
Wow, I didn't expect to get emotional right from the get, so thank you very much for that, Mo. I have to tell you that this lady's organization has changed my life, because if you wonder why I do this, I'll tell you a little bit more about it in my speech, but I lost my 8-year-old to leukemia after a brave 14-month battle. So the reason I do this is very passionate to me, but her organization is the one that helped change my life, because one day sitting at a committee meeting back in 2014, I heard one of the CannaMoms say that she asked for God to take her child every night because the suffering was just too bad. And that day, that comment changed my life, because that day I decided, you know what? I made that prayer once before my son passed the next day. And I always wondered why God answered that prayer, but not the other thousands that occurred, prior to that. So one day sitting in a committee meeting where her passionate group was testifying and begging the legislature to just please let us try this plant. That changed my life, because I went home and I said, honey, I got a great idea. I want to quit my well-paying job at the Dental Association. I want to give up all my benefits, and I want to start my own firm so I can talk about cannabis for children. What do you think? She didn't divorce me, and she actually said, yes. Do you think you can make a difference? And I said, I don't know, but can we try? And here we are. Gosh, is it 10 years later? It really is 10 years later. So with that said, thank you all. We all have our passion. We all have our reason for being here. I just thought I'd share with you mine. His name is Dylan. So my goal for today is to be awesome, cool, and funny. That was one of his wishes. So I'm going to give you a legislative update today. Historically, I've always told you how we got to where we are. I'm not going to do that this year. I'm going to give you a little update. But before I do that, the legislative process is very important to everything you do. We need to have friends in the process because it makes it that much easier when you're trying to talk to a friend about a very controversial issue than when you're trying to talk to a stranger. So we are very honored today. It's not on the program, but I tell everyone, I get paid to hang out with legislators because that's my job. But there are a few that I would hang out with even if they weren't paying me. And we have one with us today. We are honored to have a special guest today, and I'm going to ask him to take the mic and just say a few words to the group. But we have with us today Representative David Smith out of the Central Florida area. He represents District 38. He is a former colonel in the Marines. He flew over 50 missions in Iraq. He's just a hell of a guy. He's here with us today. And if you would put your hands together and say thank you, Representative Dave Smith, would you please come up and say hello to the group?
Thanks, Ron. Well, again, pleasure to be with you this morning. As Ron mentioned, David Smith. Remember, I got the easiest name to remember. So it's like you'll at the end of this conference, you'll say, we had all these speakers, but who'd you remember? David Smith, because you all grew up with one. So as Ron mentioned, so I represent Seminole County. And you know, there's actually 13 David Smiths in Seminole County. And I'm not the famous one. The famous guy builds fences, you know, your wooden fence, your wrought iron fence around. When he's done, he leaves the sign up, David Smith Fencing. So as you know, I'm out campaigning for re-election, and I'm, you know, knocking on doors and handing out palm cards saying, I'm David Smith, I'm your state representative, I'm running for re-election. People look at that and they're going, David Smith, did you build my fence? And that's where I made the transition from Marine Corps colonel to politician, I guess, when I said, well, did you like your fence? Well, again, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm here to learn. I'm here to be a resource. Come up, you know, I'm here for ideas on legislation. especially if there's something that Ron and I work on. It's like, people come up and say, hey, we're making progress in Florida, but if you could just fix this one thing here, or this little thing here, which we typically call glitch bills, that make a big impact in your industry. And again, that's where I'm kind of looking at this as you're an industry that deserves to be treated fairly. How about that for a change? And maybe I can make a difference. Again, I'm 30 years in the Marine Corps, 6 deployments overseas. All my combat time is flying in Iraq. I'm not a politician. I'm a patriot. I ran for office and was elected just as a continuation of my lifetime of service. And I can tell you without a doubt, what I do when, it's like, well, you're a legislator. What does that, what do you do? I help people. That's at the end of the day, that's what I do. I help people that have problems, people that have businesses, people that need, oftentimes, who suffer in silence because they don't think anybody can make a difference. Nobody. Who do I talk to about this? I'm like, call me. I may be able to help you. I may not, but it may be a federal issue, may be a local issue, but I probably know somebody who knows somebody that can help you. So we're always looking for good ideas. We're always looking to get educated because, again, well, I don't need to tell this group. Education is a mountain you're going to continue to climb to get people to understand medical cannabis in particular. But so I'm going to sit in the back and be quiet. If we get breaks and those kind of things, I'm happy to exchange cards. If you come up to Tallahassee, come by my office, or let's LinkedIn or some other way. But you have to grow your champions. You have to have people that understand your issue, because I'm telling you the truth. You can have the best idea that's worked in 15 other states, and it's just common sense. And gets draft legislation, goes to Tallahassee, and it will die that fast. If you don't have somebody to advocate for your issues, it will go nowhere. I mean, you're lucky to have a guy like Ron, who's well connected, well respected, and advancing ideas. But you have to grow your champions. You have to. It's a team sport, and you've got to come up. You've got to be active in the legislative process, because Tallahassee is where good ideas go to die if you don't work for them. But again, David Smith, who can't remember that? I'm the easiest guy to find. I'm the only Smith in the legislature. So pleasure to be with you. Hope to meet up with you during one of the breaks.
This is how I move. Okay, cool. And this one's back. Is that one back? Okay, cool. All right. I call myself Mr. 1985, so technology freaks me out. Sorry about that. Again, thank you, Colonel. Your service is greatly appreciated. I personally thank you for being here today. I thank you for your service in Tallahassee. All right, with that, we're going to speed through this a little bit. Ron Watson, over 33 years of lobbying experience. I should have a gold watch. I should be retired by now, but somehow I continue to do this. I actually worked at FOMA for all the doctors out there for 5 years. I worked at the FMA also for 5 years. So I kind of represented you guys separate from cannabis for many, many, many years. Excuse me. I also worked at the Dental Association for 11 years. And as I told you, decided to do that crazy thing about quitting my job and starting my own firm so I could talk about cannabis for children. I've always been a healthcare guy, so I don't know much about transportation or education or, those kind of things, but, healthcare I could bore you to death with. So I've had the pleasure of representing all the different people that you have up there, a lot of them in the cannabis space, a lot of them in the healthcare space. I also have the greatest honor of being the Director of Governmental Affairs for MOVE, and I also am their Northwest area outreach manager for the Panhandle. So I like to say I'm a middle-aged, ugly drug rep. So I go around and talk to all of the doctors about the different products that we have. Disclosures. If anybody ever asks me what I do for a living, I look them straight in the face and I say I'm a scumbag lobbyist. No laughter. Okay. So when I say that, I try to get a little laugh, because if I just say I'm a lobbyist, kind of like the legislator said, well, what do you do every day? What do you do the whole rest of the year when you're not up in Tallahassee? So really nobody understands what we do. But what we do is we try to educate. As Colonel Smith just said, you know, he may be in an education committee, a transportation committee before he gets us to his healthcare committee. There may be 15 bills in each of those committees. How can he possibly be an expert on all of those issues? He needs people like us to be able to educate him so then he can have a better idea. It's going to be his decision at the end of the day, but he's going to need people to help educate him to make the best decision that's possible. That's kind of what we do. But a lobbyist also befriends people because it's a lot easier to ask a friend for a favor than it is to ask for somebody that you've just introduced yourself to. So some of my sayings, one of my favorite sayings is no man's life, liberty, or property are safe while the legislature's in session. That was actually said in 1863. It's as true today as it ever was. Never make it personal, never take it personal. Your word is your bond. And then unfortunately later in my life, take your pain and turn it into purpose, which is what I am trying to do. Goals for the day, as I mentioned before, to be awesome, cool, and funny. My son, about 12 months into his 14-month battle down at Shands, there was a whiteboard that said his goal for the day. And in his handwriting one day when I walked in there, his goal was to be awesome, to be cool, and to be funny. So for the rest of my life, every day when I wake up, my goal is to be awesome, to be cool, and to be funny. I fail more often than I succeed, but that is the goal for each day. So my goal for y'all today is to have an awesome, cool, and funny day. In the highest honor of my life, if you go to any move in the state, and we now have, I think we opened up number 68 today, there is a plaque hanging in every one of those move stores honoring my son that says be awesome, cool, and funny. So if you happen to be a patient and if you ever happen to go into a move, please look for that little black sign in honor to my son. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk a little bit about the MMTC licensure process, and oh boy, there's a whole bunch more available. We're going to hit on the legislative summary pretty quickly, and then I'm going to talk about the adult use constitutional amendments. Okay, not to bore everyone, because I'm sure everyone in the room knows, in Florida, we are vertical, right? What's the difference between vertical and horizontal? How come we can't compare Florida to Colorado? Because we have completely different licensure structures, right? So in Florida, if move, I have to do everything. I have to grow, I have to process, I have to transport, I have to own all of my own stores, and every product in my store I grew. Same with Trulieve, same with Curaleaf, same with all of us. We're required to be what's called vertical. You go to Colorado, they're horizontal. There you can either be the grower or the processor or the mom and pop retail store. That changes everything. Why? Because out there, retail has every different product on there. Here, every product on our shelves is made by us. So you have to look at how the regulation is structured in a state before you can really compare apples and oranges. So we are vertical in Florida. We also have limited licenses versus open registration. Some other states, basically, as long as you have a pulse and you have the fee, they'll give you a license. We don't do that here in Florida. We're very limited. Interestingly enough, though, you get one license to be vertical, and you can open up as many dispensaries as you can afford. That's very unique to regulation in the rest of the country. So Florida is very unique in how we regulate. So presently, we have 22 MMTCs. So that's called the Medical Marijuana Treatment Center. The moves, the Curaleafs, the Trulives, all of them are MMTC. So when you hear that MMTC, think dispensary. Presently, we have 22 of us, and there's one black farmer license pending. And not to bore you on that, but that's important when we talk about telehealth a little bit downstream. The original licensees had to be a 30-year nursery. It was determined that there was, it was impossible for certain black farmers to be able to be a 30-year nursery because of discrimination, and there was a lawsuit. So there was a law passed that said, okay, if you're a part of the Pigford class, which was for the black farmers who were discriminated against, you would also get a separate license. Finally, after all these years, they had an application process and they awarded someone, and now there's some people upset that they didn't get chosen. So we do have one black farmer license right now, but it's still pending. I'll give the Department of Office of Medical Marijuana Use credit. They put out a weekly report. If you all have never seen this, you can sign up for it, or you can go to their website, and their website actually has these weekly stored. If you look at it, it lists all of the MMTCs, all the dispensaries right there. The number of locations, Trulieve has 125. This was from a week ago. We just opened. So moved actually this week, we'll have 68 up there. You can see actually the amount of milligrams that they sell each week, the low THC milligrams, and the amount that is in the form for smoking. We are incredible in Florida with the amount of data tracking that we have. And this is just one more example. So every week they put out this report, and you can kind of see how the MMTCs are doing, so to speak. all those those links are live. So if you click on any of those links, you can go right to their website. So if you all have never played around with their website, it's really very impressive. The other thing that's in this little weekly report is you can see how many patients there are. We have over 820,000 patients now. We have been averaging still to this day about 2,500 patients a week. So 10,000 patients a month, 120,000 patients a year. And we've been doing this now for year after year after year. There's about, what does it say, 2,400 docs. All of those are not really active. So there's probably less than that are actually making recommendations. And then they give you some other weekly highlights about, you know, who opened their stores and so forth. So again, you can sign up for this email. It's pushed to you weekly, or you can go to their website and you can see all of this information too. And I'm going to go fast, but my slides will be in the presentation. So you all will have a chance to be able to look at these slides a little bit later. So you can take pictures if you want, but I will also provide all of these slides to you. Okay. Department of Health. They are the ones that sit over top of the Office of Medical Marijuana Use. They have rules in addition to the statutes that govern what we can do, what the patients can do, and a little bit of what the doctors can do. And so there's the website, knowthefacsmmj.com. It really is a pretty good website. That's where the registry is. That's where a whole lot of the other information is as well. All right, so with all of that said, we have 22 existing licenses, and believe it or not now, we just opened up the application process again, and now there are 22 additional licenses available. There were 74 applicants for these 22 licenses. I believe the non-refundable fee was $146,000 times 74. Anybody want to do the math? $10.8 million. So the department just got a little bit healthier as far as their bank account goes. And so the way that I look at this, there's going to be 22 happy people. And there's going to be 52, you should have picked me people. And so this is kind of how it happened the first time. When we opened up licenses the first time, there were 5 that were chosen, and everybody that came in second or third said, no, you should have chose me. And they sued, right? So it'll be intriguing to see how this happens. The way that the law works is for every for every 100,000 new patients, they add 4 more MMTCs. So the reason we added all the way up to 22 is because it took them several years of lawsuits and other things as these kept accumulating. So they just did a batch, and there literally are 22. So after these are awarded, this will literally double the size of dispensaries in the state of Florida. And remember, you get 1 license, but you can open up as many dispensaries as you can afford. These are the 74 that were mentioned. Again, forgive Mr. 1985 for his, wonderful abilities here. But they are all listed, and that's the website that they're all listed at. I was not able to actually find the applications. If you want to go back and look at some of the older applications, they're online. Now they're completely redacted, so you can not really read much, but they're there. But for whatever reason, I still haven't seen that these applications are available to the public. So that's kind of the MMTCs, kind of where we stand. And so I'm going to kind of get in now to a little bit of the legislative update. Back to the no man's life, liberty, or property are safe when they're in session. Well, you're safe now because they've gone home. But I can tell you what, in all my 33 years of working the process, I have never seen a session with more what I'll call huge issues pass, one after another, after another, after another. And if you take a look up there, I've listed some of them. These aren't even all of them. But these are some of the huge issues that passed this last legislative session. Again, any one of these issues normally would have been an issue big enough to celebrate a session by. And I'm not kidding. Any one of these issues. If you look at the tort reform issue, the business community has been trying to get these tort reform for 15, 20 years. And I mean, so just the tort reform victory for the business community in and of itself would be the highlight of any other, what I'll call normal session. So you can kind of read all the ones that are up there. I mean, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Constitutional carry, whether you like it or not, I kind of like it because half the time I hear about, people not wanting to get their medical card because they're scared that they won't either be able to have their concealed weapons permit or they can't buy a gun. And I can talk to you all about that more, but it's the background check where it requires a level 2 that you have to answer yes, that you have a drug problem if you have a medical card, and that disqualifies you from the level 2 background check. So the interesting thing about the constitutional carry is that you don't have that background check anymore. So it took away at least one excuse from people who were saying they weren't going to go get their card. The other big one is the immigration reform for all of us MMTCs, more than 25 employees, which is all of us. We're going to probably have to use E-Verify now for every one of our hires. But if you look at all those different issues up there, it's just an unbelievable, a huge session. As you well know, we have a governor that's now officially in the race for president, and a lot of these issues are going to be highlighted, I would imagine, as he runs for president. So specifically to us, I just talked about constitutional care and E-Verify. The biggest deal, the governor still doesn't have the bill yet. He still hasn't signed it, so it's not officially law yet, but we passed telehealth this last year. Little round of applause here. We passed telehealth this last year. It was a big deal. Basically, the way that it's going to work is just like the pandemic, that if you saw the patient initially face-to-face for the first time, same patient, same doctor, you can do telehealth now moving forward, July 1st. And the governor still hasn't signed it yet. I will also tell you that there's some other language in there back to the Black farmer. There were 12 applicants. So there were 11 unhappy people because they chose one. There was some language that surfaced at the end of session that was going to basically say some of the Black farmer losers are also going to get a license. It's a little controversial. Personally, I'm fine with it, but I'm not so sure that the executive office may be fine with it. So those two issues were married. Telehealth was married with the Black farmer issue, passed the legislature, and is now waiting to be sent to the governor. It's strange. Once the governor receives a bill, he only has 2 weeks to act. But there's really no time frame from when the bill passes the legislature to when they officially present it to the governor. So we're in that gray area of waiting to see when he officially gets the bill. But it will be effective July 1st if he signs it. So that was a huge victory for us. There was also a Department of Health bill that had a little bit of changes in it. There's some other stuff as well. I got to speed up here a little bit. A hemp bill passed. There was going to be a hemp bill that was basically going to regulate them out of existence. It was going to add all of the deltas together and strictly limit the amount that could be in each one. It looked like they were going to be put out of business, at least the Delta side of their business. But I think in one of the best lobbying jobs all session, that bill turned around 180 degrees and now doesn't have any of the Delta exclusions in there. And it basically just clarified a few things on edibles for under 21 for children and a few other things. But really, as far as the lobbyists go for hemp, if you're in the hemp industry, you should probably call your lobbyist up and you know, kiss them right on the mouth, because you're still in business, frankly, because of their efforts. We also had a 280E bill. Everybody who thinks they want to be an MMTC, do you know what I pay in taxes? 70 to 75 to 80%. You know why? Because we can't write off any ordinary business expense because everything we do is federally illegal. So imagine if you had to run your business to a 70% tax bracket. Sound like a good idea? That's what we have to deal with. So we had a bill that was going to fix that. And unfortunately, you know, it didn't get any hearing. I got to speed up a little. So what we have in here is there's a summary of the actual telehealth bill, what was included in it. It gives you a little bit more about the Black farmer issue too. This is the actual language. So if you want to look at the exact language that passed, basically I described it. If you have an initial face-to-face with your doctor, you can do telehealth forever after that. If you go to change doctors, you have to have that initial visit face-to-face with that new doctor, and then you can do telehealth forever. But if you switch doctors, you got to go back to one face-to-face. There's the actual language. Representative Roach up on the left-hand side. You want to talk about friends in the legislature. And I know I gotta, thank you, Doc. 3-4 years ago, Representative Roach was asked by the speaker to be the author of the 10% THC cap. Now, when the speaker asks you to do something, you say, yes, sir, and you go do it. This was actually presented to him. And needless to say, we fought for a while. So Representative Roach and I got to know each other very well through disagreements. And 2 years later, he came back with a bill that I said had some good stuff in it and some bad stuff in it, and it didn't pass. This year, he comes back and he files the telehealth bill all by himself. So sometimes in this process, you can make a difference through gradually educating somebody and getting them to understand. And Representative Roach has told me flat out that he credits us and he credits our advocacy for getting him to the position where he is now. So I can't thank Representative Roach enough for this. And if you're out there, please give him a round of applause. Senator Broder was our Senate sponsor, and he was wonderful as well. I got to speed up. There's the rest of the language. There's the OMMU bill. Oh, great news. A separate telehealth bill passed that I didn't tell anybody about because I was worried that we would screw it up because cannabis might pass. They clarified now in regular telehealth, you can do audio now. It used to be you couldn't. So several years ago, they passed a bill that said you can do schedule 3, 4, and 5 through telehealth, but they excluded audio phone calls only. This year's bill clarified, okay, we'll let you do it now. So the cool thing about that is I didn't tell everybody that also applies to cannabis now. So there's the hemp bill update there. Oh, reciprocity. All right. Dana Trabluski up there, lady up in the, she as a freshman legislator had the courage to stand up to that speaker that I told you about that wanted a 10% THC cap bill. She was the only one. I had 6 people who didn't want the bill, who were working against the bill. There was one person who had the courage to actually vote against the speaker in committee. And her name is Dana Trabluski. And I will be forever thankful for her because I think she had a lot to do with educating that class to all go en masse to the speaker and say, we don't want this to happen. We don't want to embarrass you, sir, but we don't want this to happen. Please stop. Lo and behold, it stopped. I credit her. She also ran some language for us this year on reciprocity. What does reciprocity mean? If I have a medical card in another state, that medical card could be used here. It was great language. Representative Ralph Masulo, who is a medical doctor, had filed this bill a couple of years ago. It never went anywhere. She ran an amendment for us, and there was a point of order made where she had to withdraw it. But she got the opportunity to come up on the floor to talk about it. We got a lot of people saying, yeah, why don't we do that? You know, tourism here in Florida, yada, yada, yada. You can't take your medicine across state lines still. This is a way to handle that. That was the 280E bill. Dan Daly, thank you for filing it. All right, real quick, next year's session. We have a weird thing now where sessions are 8 months apart and 12 months apart. So we got an 8-month apart one. You can see where it starts. Great news. Trulieve announced yesterday they got enough signatures to be on the ballot. Congratulations to them for adult use. However, we still have to have the court review it. I'll remind everyone, they had 500,000 votes a couple of years ago for one, and it got tossed by the court. So here we are, we got the 900,000 plus signatures. We're still waiting for the court to rule on single subject and clarity. There is the actual amendment if you want to read it in my package. And then we also have another constitutional amendment that somebody up here on the stage is pushing on home grow. And I have to explain the reason that there's a separate constitutional amendment for home grow is because of the single subject. Trulieve could not have put home grow in the other constitutional amendment. It would not have passed Supreme Court muster. So for all those people out there that are mad at Trulieve for not including home grow, they couldn't have. So there is a separate constitutional amendment being pushed by our good friend here, Mo, that would allow home grow for patients as well. With that, I hope everyone had a cool and funny time. If we have time for questions, great. If not, I will be around all weekend.
I have never been invited. I've been invited to speak at FMCCE, but I've never been invited as a mistress of ceremonies before. And I think by the end of this panel, you'll understand why I was chosen or asked to do this. There are a lot of firsts on this panel, at first in activism and advocacy. And even in the audience, here's some of our earliest, most passionate, dedicated activists, healthcare providers. I'm sure there's more than I'm going to name, but even at first glance, Dr. Barry Gordon, Dr. Sasha No, Dr. Josephine right here, Flowery being the first home grow supporter, a lot of firsts. And the first organization to provide corporate sponsorship to CannaMoms for children like ours and other nonprofits in the state of Florida. Cannabis was such a hard space to be in from a nonprofit perspective because they can't do tax write-offs. There's really no incentive for organizations to support nonprofits in this space. And with that, the first organization to provide that corporate sponsorship to CannaMoms and several other nonprofits was Trulieve. And introducing on that note, Dr. William Troutt.
Thank you so much. So I've been asked to get us back on time, so I will not delay. Let's go back in history to 2300, 1700 BCE. This is an archaeological dig from the northern Afghanistan area currently. And what they uncovered were these large bowls, mortars, if you will, for grinding up herbs. So this might be the first dispensary in the archaeological historical record. And what they suggested based on the impressions in these vessels were that cannabis, this was a cannabis dispensary, and they suggested it was cannabis and opium and ephedra that they were mixing in these medicinal concoctions. Now, there has been debate about that. It's been suggested later that it was millet rather than the cannabis seeds because of the size, but then there's also discussion about they have identified cannabis seeds of that size. So we'll see if that debate goes on, but this definitely gives us a picture of what botanical medicine was looking like at this time. As far as, again, this is the transition from going from eating plants for medicinal purposes to actually extracting those materials into medicines. The other thing that is this brings to light is the fact that about combining botanical medicines. And that's a important aspect of botanical medicine is it's typically a formula. So we don't just use one botanical, there's typically several that are in there to target different systems of the body. We'll move a little bit to the northeast and further in time a bit, 500 BC, Turpan, China, the Yanghai tombs. And this was a very arid region. And in these tombs, they found these very well preserved mummies. In fact, this one right here had about 789 grams of cannabis in the tomb with him. So about 1.75 pounds. He definitely is way over his allotment. And interestingly enough, again, because it was so well preserved, this cannabis was actually still green. And you could see the trichome structures on these leaves, which allowed them to do chemical analysis of these trichomes and find out exactly what type of cannabis this was. Also, leather baskets and wood bowl filled with cannabis seeds, leaves, and shoots at the head and the feet. So with the analysis, they found CBN, cannabinol, was the most represented cannabinoid here. And as many of us know, cannabinol is the degradation product of THC. So again, it is believed that this was THC-rich cannabis that was being used for its psychoactive effects. They also found cannabichromene, CBC, which is known to be found with THC strains. CBL, CBD, CBE, and CBNV with degradation product of THCV. So that was present as well. And also this wooden bowl showed signs of use as a mortar, prolonged signs of use, suggesting that they were pulverizing it before consumption, and there weren't any signs of burning of the product. So they were probably using it for oral consumption. And Chinese written reports from 2,000 years ago describe this clan as a nomadic, light-haired, blue-eyed, Caucasian-speaking Indo-European languages. Not only that, they found riggings for horses and musical instruments along with it. So this was probably one of the shamans of the clan. So our botanical nomenclature, Cannabis sativa, L. Carl, L is for Linnaeus, who binomial nomenclature first named it. Sativa means cultivated. And then Lamarck proposed a second species, indica, which is a wild species grown in India region, eastern regions, but the conventional wisdom is there's just one species, Cannabis sativa L, and then other subtypes. We do know that sativas tend to be or are reported to be more uplifting, and indicas are usually reported to be a little more sedative. Family Cannabaceae, also hops is in that family. The pharmacopoeia name is Cannabis inflorescentia. And again, that denotes that it is the flowering portion of the plant that is typically used for the medicine, because that's where we find the majority of our cannabinoids and terpenoids. And then, of course, this is a commonly used plant around the world with lots of different names in many different cultures and languages. So cannabis as a natural resource. So I teach this class every semester for the nursing school at Northern Arizona University on cannabis. And I ask this question every time I do it because I'm in the industry and I think this is common knowledge now, but let's see in this room, because this is a pretty educated room, show of hands. So who knew the first American flag was made of cannabis? Okay. First draft of the Constitution on cannabis paper. Okay. First Levi Strauss jeans. Okay. Not a lot, right? This is important stuff. So as far as cannabis as a natural resource, #1 cash crop in the United States until the late 1930s. Greatest portion of all textiles and fabrics around the world were made from cannabis up until the 1800s. Sails on the ships made from cannabis. Most fiber pulp for paper, printings, books, Bibles, maps, rope, twine, cordage, right up until 1937. Lighting oil, all of the lamps were hemp seed oil right up until the 1800s. Hemp seed contains all the essential amino acids and omega fatty acids to sustain life. It was commonly used in porridge gruels throughout the world, and predominant seed for wild birds and birdseed, and sold domestically in the United States through 1937. Biomass fuel, one of the largest producers of biomass with over 70% cellulose. Henry Ford's first car was powered from cannabis fuel. And then, of course, the medicine. The fact that we don't know this type of information, I think, says something. And it's very, very important that we get this information out. And also, as far as medicine's concerned, natural resources, having access to non-toxic, sustainable, natural resources is very, very important to our health and quality of life. Organoleptic assessment. So this is what we use in the botanical world to assess the potency of our medicine, the qualities of our medicine. So using our senses to evaluate those botanical properties. So visual, as far as cannabis and other plants, they should have vibrant colors. Again, any necrosis or darkness could show signs of pests such as mites and molds, which affects the quality and the health of the medicine. Smell. Smell is very important for the cannabis medicine, as we know. It can let us know those constituent properties as far as terpene content. There's another great article that was published by Dr. Russo, The Nose Knows. And what they found out is that how people assess the quality of their medicine or the sensation they get from their medicine is more associated with a pleasing smell than actually the THC or any of the other constituents that are found in it. So again, that smell of it can help people realize which strains may be best for them. Texture, again, sticky, dense. If it's crumbly or dried, that shows signs of age, which could also show signs of degradation. And then taste as well. With cannabis, you also have to bring in the actual effect that comes with it, because we have many different strains of or types of cannabis as far as psychoactive versus non-psychoactive. So that goes a long way to that organoleptic assessment of cannabis. And of course, we have to recognize Dr. Mechoulam, who passed this year, and we all stand on his shoulders as far as the work that he and his colleagues did. Quote from him: "In order to understand the pharmacology and do clinical trials, you need a strong chemical basis. That's why my group started looking at chemistry of cannabinoids. That was in 1963, 1964. Our first paper was on the structure of cannabidiol. And a bit later, we isolated for the first time THC in pure form and elucidated its structure. And which brings us to building on that chemistry. So this is a paper that was published out of Israel looking at new chromatography, mass spectrometry, and testing for all the different cannabinoids in cannabis. They're getting very good at it. They identified 94 phytocannabinoids in 36 of the most commonly prescribed cannabis strains and plants in Israel. And the concentration of cannabis compounds depends on the plant's tissue type, age, variety, growth, conditions, harvest time, and storage conditions. And as we all know, there's this cannabis plant has different forms of that medicine based on its age and how it's produced. Again, the cannabinoid acid forms are what we find in that fresh green plant, and then age and processing will change those over to the neutral forms. So cannabis for medical use, versatile plant rather than a single drug. And this is the hallmark of botanical medicines. Most plants have 500 plus different chemical compounds that target multiple systems of the body. So that is the difference between pharmaceutical, single drug, single target, and plant-based medicines. And obviously cannabis being one of the most prominent in that, being that, again, targeting that endocannabinoid system with so many different targets to look for. And then now that we have this chemical classification, we can move past the sativa and indica and start talking about chemotypes. So chemotype 1, THC dominant, chemotype 2, CBD THC balanced, and at type 3, CBD dominant. As far as recommending it for patients, though, again, everybody is very different and very individual as far as what medicines are best for them. However, when I think of type 1, I think of pain, severe pain, musculoskeletal issues. When I think of type 2, I think of autoimmune conditions. When I think of type 3, I think of neurological conditions, seizure disorders. But as I said, everybody's an individual, but those are definitely ones that pop into my mind when I'm looking at these 3 different chemotype classifications. And of course, many other secondary metabolites as far as our terpenoids and secondary cannabinoids and flavonoids. Metabolic profiling of cannabis secondary metabolites. So decarboxylation is a very important thing for us to understand, right? Because that changes this medicine as far as age or heating of that medicine. And the majority of our medicines at the dispensaries have been purposefully decarboxylated to get them into that neutral state or to make THC psychoactive. And storage of our medicine is very important for those people that are looking for those cannabinoid acids or raw types of cannabinoid medicines. This study was showing that delta-9 THC concentrations for type 1 samples decreased by approximately 33% after 1 year of storage at room temperature, basically 25 degrees Celsius. And also, we need to note that the neutral cannabinoids like THC and CBD were increasing over that time frame as that conversion was taking place. And then again, THC further degrades into CBN, and CBN was not detected initially in the samples, but increased over time. After 1 year, it was at 0.37%. So again, fairly stable over first couple years, those neutral cannabinoids. And then terpenes decreased by up to 50% after 4 months of storage. So again, those individuals that are looking for those whole plant medicines with that terpene profile, fresh cannabis is very important. So the take-home message here is that storing your cannabis in the refrigerator, so 4 degrees Celsius, had the best storage conditions for it, can extend the life of that medicine. So Dr. Meshulam, when he was talking about the entourage effect, right? And we all hear and know that term, the entourage effect now, about all of these cannabinoids and terpenoids working together to have the medicinal effect. But the first paper that they published on the entourage effect, they were actually talking about the endocannabinoids inside the body. So 2-AG, 2-arachidonyl glycerol, one of our two main endocannabinoids, along with anandamide, CB1, CB2 full agonist, and moderate to low affinity at those receptors. But what they found was that there's other compounds that accompany 2-AG, such as 2-acylglycerol esters, 2-linaloyl glycerol, pardon me, and 2-palmitoyl glycerol. And these don't bind to the cannabinoid receptors themselves, but they enhance the activity of 2-AG at those receptors. So this was coined that entourage effect. And as we know, not only CB1 and CB2 receptors, but this endocannabinoid system has a wide breadth into different systems of our body. CBD has been shown to have 64 different targets in the body. So we need to get past looking at this system or these cannabinoids as CB1, CB2 receptors and realize that this is more of a tone of our entire system. So there's that endocannabinoid system has a tone, and that psychoactive effect that people are experiencing, they're actually experiencing the change of that tone of that endocannabinoid system. So cannabis extracts greater than the sum of their parts, a great article published by McPartland and Russo. And again, I want to give credit to our great researchers. Every time I go to look for a subject on cannabis, Russo's name and McPartland's name is popping up, and I've learned so much from them. But this review article, Carlini et al. 1974 determined that cannabis extracts produce effects 2 or 4 times greater than the expected from their THC content. It was also detected the presence of unidentified powerful synergists in cannabis extracts causing 330% greater activity in mice than THC alone. And THC side effects may be mitigated by the other compounds that are in these whole plant cannabis medicines. As far as our entourage effect is concerned with phytocannabinoids, one of my favorites is the fact that we see that these whole plant medicines have efficacy with seizure disorders at much smaller doses than isolates. So 6 milligrams per kilogram a day versus 25 milligrams per kilogram a day. And I am getting the cane already. This is a great study showing that certain cannabis extracts are actually more potent at killing certain cancer lines than others. And some of them have the same amount of THC and CBD in it. So it's not just the THC and CBD, it is these other cannabinoids as well. And interestingly enough, it was the cannabinoid acids that had the greatest effect on prostate cancer. Tea is a great way to get your THCA if you can't find it in the dispensaries. A cup of tea can give you about 10.32 milligrams of THCA versus 2.4 milligrams of THC. And of course, tinctures are our bread and butter as far as botanical medicines are concerned. I was going to go through the recipe for a nice homemade tincture and talk about potencies, but we won't be doing that. Herodotus, again, describing the fumigation of cannabis in the tent with the Scythians. Oh boy, these are some great tombs where they were smoking cannabis and using hot rocks to do it. And then to finish up, we need to get past looking at cannabis as far as the specific medical condition that it treats. And again, we know that cannabis is great at treating pain, but not only does it help people with pain, maybe it helps a little bit with their anxiety, or maybe it helps with their sleep along with that. Maybe it helps a little bit with their inflammation. So we need to start looking about quality of life with cannabis as a medicine. I think that's a much better measure to see what it's actually doing for people. And this was a great study with 3,000 patients that showed that on a quality of life scale, they were increasing on all of the different aspects of it. And great case study that I would love to share with you. Do I got 5 minutes?
You have about 3.
I got about 3 minutes.
I'm sorry.
So when I did certifications for a couple of years before I became a medical director, and this individual, we'll call him John, 54 years old. He comes in and he's just defeated. You can see it on his face. He's, again, overweight. He's lost mobility. He's dealing with very severe back pain, fused discs, inserted rods, on several medications. And he said, I just can't do this anymore. Someone told me about this cannabis. I want to give it a try. So we gave him his certification, but I also talked to him a naturopath. I talked to him about postural awareness. I talked to him about movement. I talked to him about not looking for his sweetness of life in simple sugars and processed foods, and provided the certification for him and told him to keep a journal and follow up with his primary care physician. So John comes back 1 year later to get his renewal, and I almost didn't recognize him. Looked like a different person. He had the big glow on his face, the big smile. I could tell he couldn't wait to tell me about the experience that he had had. He was moving much better. His pain had went from 7 on 8 on average to 1 out of 3 on average, with spikes down from 10 out of 10 to 5 out of 10, with the cannabis helped with greatly. He had lost 70 pounds. His medication that he had landed on, and again, I did the full education for him and let him decide what worked best for him. He landed on inhaled cannabis 1 to 3 times a day as needed, and then a 5 milligram dose before bed of an oral dose. He discontinued his Xanax that he was using for anxiety and sleep, and that happened immediately. Discontinued the oxycodone completely that he was using for pain. And now, is that because, again, cannabis interacts with those mu receptors and synergizes with the oxycodone, or was that because he's feeling better? He got off the couch, he was fishing again, he's doing things he hadn't done in years. He lost 70 pounds. So he gets off the metformin, the blood sugar. Is that because cannabis interacts with our metabolism? Or again, is that because he's moving now, he's feeling better? He got off one of his blood pressure medications, the diuretic, and significantly reduced his beta blocker. So again, these are the quality of life type things that we're talking about. And cannabis definitely has that ability just to change people's perspective and help them look at things from a bit different perspective, get them out of that rut. Thank you so much for your time.
I don't like being the tyrant. My daughter can vouch for that. A lot of firsts and a lot of earliest we've already established. Earliest advocacy, earliest licensed MMTCs, earliest nonprofit support. And now it is my privilege to introduce to you the following distinguished doctors. First and earliest, most educated on cannabis, who have played instrumental roles in the progress of cannabis research and the progress of transformative legislation reflecting the findings of that research, but known more personally to me as the earliest doctors in our circle in the fight for my own daughter's life. In 2013, when she was diagnosed with brain cancer, her prognosis was grim, and the diagnosis was considered incurable. It was clear that conventional options wouldn't save her, and I would have to research all alternative options. I found myself bombarded with personal opinions, layman recommendations, anecdotal evidence, and I was inundated with a barrage of faux cure-alls and inconsistent information. Feeling lost and overwhelmed, cannabis came up time and time again, but there was no solid evidence for her age or diagnosis. There had been no documentaries and no news reports on this. I scoured the research studies directly, read every single word, every page, trying to make sense of a foreign language I needed help and guidance. A couple of names came up time and time again, Dr. ElSohly and Dr. Mahmoud. I realized these guys were receiving federal funding and they were probably being contacted by media from around the world every single day. But I reached out to them and unexpectedly received a response immediately from both of them. Not just as doctors or scientists, but as compassionate human beings who understood and empathized with the magnitude of our struggle. My daughter was literally dying in a hospital bed, and these gentlemen called me personally to respond to my questions. And for the first time since her diagnosis, I felt a glimmer of hope. More importantly, as a mother, I felt empowered to help her. Their willingness to connect with me became a guiding light, ushering me into my daughter's journey with cannabis medicine, the path that ultimately salvaged her quality of life and quite possibly saved her life. Returning home to Florida, though, that initial sense of helplessness and hopelessness returned. The local physicians were uninformed, and our laws reflected that. That presented two profound challenges for us. One, my daughter had no access to the medicine that was helping save her life. And two, the need to advocate for medical cannabis and the program through legislative channels. In the midst of that despair, Destiny intervened while I was in Tallahassee on behalf of the Compassionate Use Act in late 2013, early 2014, when I crossed paths with a truly remarkable individual, a highly respected MD, an educator, and intriguingly also an accomplished botanist, a highly awarded horticulturist, a Florida master gardener, who was also a board-certified anesthesiologist trained in pain management and addiction studies. There literally could not be a more perfect or credible resume to speak on behalf of cannabis as medicine. And fortunately, for my daughter, for our family, and for Florida patients, that is exactly what he did. His profound credentials were matched only by his level of compassion and willingness to fight, to have Florida law and medicine reflect that compassion. In our earliest conversations, he said, if you get the door opened, I'll walk through it. The state entrusted him with crafting Florida's first CME program, authoring our first mandated physician education program for the Department of Health. And he was and is the only physician that the state tasked with determining the rules supporting our state cannabis laws. Later in 2014, he graciously collaborated with me to co-author the state's inaugural non-government mandated cannabis-oriented CME program, and has since authored 4 textbook chapters concerning the endocannabinoid system, receptors, and medical cannabis. He advises and educates on behalf of the University of Florida and has continued to advance the safe and effective clinical use of cannabinoids. But his contributions extend far beyond the written word. He has played a pivotal role in shaping Florida's initial cannabis legislation, and our connection has blossomed into a cherished friendship characterized by the sharing of knowledge and information, our unwavering support, and profound camaraderie, most notably, our shared compassion. It is with deep emotion and gratitude that I witness the culmination of mine and my daughter's journey today here on this stage. In an unexpected twist, almost precisely a decade after her diagnosis, destiny has brought us full circle, uniting the very first 3 doctors who held my hand when they didn't have to, a stranger, in the fight for my daughter's life, and subsequently to assist countless families like ours. On this stage, I bear witness to and celebrate their remarkable achievements. I thank them with the deepest gratitude and with a heavy heart, pay tribute to Dr. Mahmoud. So without further ado, it is my distinct honor to introduce to you one of our heroes, the heroes of our personal narrative, whose unparalleled expertise, boundless compassion, and relentless dedication to advancing the frontiers of cannabis medicine make him a beacon of hope for countless individuals seeking relief, healing, and common sense legislation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeffrey Block.
Thanks, Moriah. I actually am going to be introducing Dr. ElSohly in a moment, but we talked yesterday and I wanted to show you this slide and start to tell you my bias. It's chemistry. I was at Emory University in the early to mid 1970s, then medical school, not at the University of Florida, at and I've served there for the last several years. But if you look at this slide a moment, this is what ancient healers did. And still today, ancient healers, the botanical wisdom gets shared generationally to ensure health and survival. And yet Moriah is mentioning compassion. I'll show you a slide and actually a political cartoon that really bothered me in 2014. This is already old, all right? And the doc here, he's got an FMA logo. I'm wearing the badge here. I'm a proud member, but this guy looks uncompassionate. And we know that's far from the truth. Fact is, though, the scientific method is dispassionate. So to cast someone looking like this, looking bored, uneducated, and in this case, recommending narcotics instead, just shows a lack of education, which has changed notably over the last 10 years. So where I'd like to go from this is just to tell you a little bit then. I am a botanist. These are plants in my own greenhouses at home, raising plants that are far more challenging than cannabis to breed. Some books down on the bottom Moriah was mentioning about, and in particular in the middle down there is not UF, where I've served and been privileged and honored to serve as the alumni president of the medical school to confer the oath of medicine to physicians. And although it's kind of hard to read there on the bottom, what it says is also attributable to Hippocrates, that nature itself is the best physician. So I want to talk just very briefly about the chemistry, because we're here to recognize Raphael Mechoulam, a biochemist. And Dr. ElSohly, I'll introduce a short while, as a pharmacist like myself, as an anesthesiologist who is a clinical pharmacist and physiologist. Chemistry makes all the difference. And for those of you who may wonder, why would plant chemicals interact with animals? You should look no further than what I saw when I started in medical school and saw my first molecule of hemoglobin. I had already seen what chlorophyll looked like, because I go back with botany long before medical school. And they are identical molecules, with the exception, and I'm bringing back your chemistry, a central cation. Plants have magnesium in the middle of chlorophyll that enable it to photosynthesize as the energy source of plants, while humans have iron in the middle of the same molecule otherwise, and the iron is that 2+ cation, gives it an entirely different function, so that in all of us, our energy is delivered through oxygen by hemoglobin. With some ancient molecular similarities, these are from the same sources. This is all part of really very distant and ancient evolution that tells you how closely we are biochemically related to plants and fungi, a third kingdom, by the way. So plants and what they do, the biochemical power of plants is quite amazing. And I'm going to quote here a poet, Michael Pollan, in The Botany of Desire, where he talks about plants and the powers of the chemicals by saying that they nourish us and poison us. They delight our senses of sight, smell, and taste. They calm our nerves and wake us up. They even change the content of our minds and the experience of our consciousness. And not to wane philosophical here, but I've given talks like this where people have asked me, Doc, what does it mean to get stoned? What does it mean to be stoned? And great question, isn't it? How many of you can really answer that biochemically? Well, we really don't understand consciousness to that degree yet. So if we can't understand consciousness, how are we supposed to understand the change of consciousness? Leave that to the poets like Michael Pollan. So moving on then, I want to recognize other heroes of mine, including this, Sir Robert Robinson, Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1947. Years before, you don't get the Nobel Prize when you're a kid. Usually there are octogenarians. So in the early 1900s, he's the one who found the precursors to cocaine. This is how it's used by indigenous people, much in their culture, the same way we use coffee here, and also with narcotics and morphine. So these discoveries showing how plant alkaloids in this case, which are water soluble, I'll get to why that's important later and when I speak with you, are part of the history of Nobel Prize winning medicine that bring plants to people. And to continue on from there, this is the biochemistry. There's no tests on this on your CMEs, I promise. But this is the work of Professor Raphael Mechoulam in Jerusalem from Hebrew University. A life's work. This started in the early 1960s, culminated by about 1964 to find the biosynthetic pathways in the plant of how is THC, CBD, and all of these other chemicals you see there are different cannabinoids. The left side there are acid forms, the right side are non-acid forms, but they all have their own unique biochemistry for those things that they do for us. So they have active metabolites, and this is the core of the science for there. Interestingly, in the light green block up top, GPP, geranyl pyrophosphate, is also the same parent molecule for terpenes, those things that Dr. Troutt here mentioned give plants their smell, that very often someone's choice of one chemotype or another are based on the smells. That chemistry is from Mechoulam's lab. More Nobel Prize winning research in 2015. These are all diseases involving parasites. And the Nobel Prize that year in medicine went to artemisinin. Artemisia annua is a plant rediscovered from ancient Chinese texts that was developed to develop artemisinin and received the Nobel Prize in 2015, the use of an ancient Chinese medicine text plant that was rediscovered for the purpose this way. Again, Nobel Prize worthy. So where are we going with Nobel Prizes? Yet another Nobel recipient. Being able to explain things simply means you got to understand it first. And one of the people who was formative in my understanding was Professor Mechoulam. Raphael Mechoulam actually is considered as the father in cannabinoid medicine. He was born in 1930 and he passed away on March 9th, coincidentally my father's birthday. But nevertheless, in 1964, the work done could have in of itself been recognized, but the real research that his lab came out with didn't happen until 30 years later, in the early 1990s, after I'm already in my past my residency in practice. That's when the body's own ligands, the things that THC is mimicking, not the other way around. Those body's own ligands, anandamide and 2-AG, were discovered through Professor Mechoulam's lab. That's far more important because that describes the body's mechanism of action on how cannabinoids really work. And if you don't have that biologic context, I mentioned this yesterday, it's awfully challenging to understand the limited evidence-based data around cannabis. Then in 2015 and 16, there was actually a documentary film. I'm going to show you a slight snippet of it coming up now, called The Scientist, Are We Missing Something? These are lifetime achievements. This is us together in his lab. And Professor Mechoulam, as I said, was formative. So let's play the video just for a moment as a good segue to introduce Professor Mahmoud ElSohly.
Meetings are useful in many ways. People learn what other people are doing and going to do. What they have done is published, so I don't have to go to meetings to learn what other people have done in the past. Most meetings are just getting people from different aspects of a topic. They talk to each other, and maybe something new comes out.
If you really look at the history and what's been going on ever since he discovered THC, it's not just discovered THC and then just, relied on that and didn't do much, but he continued to have such a vision for the next step and the next step and the next step. 9, 8. Is that a test for whether I'm intoxicated or not? My name is Mahmoud ElSohly. I am a research professor at the University of Mississippi. Cannabis is what I'm known for. Cannabis is a very old plant, a very old medicine, if you will, that people have used it for so many indications over the years. In the literature, marijuana has been used for all different types of things. One would say, well, this is crazy. This is no such plant that can, do all of this. And today, it's very easy to really go back to this old literature about the different indications for which marijuana was prescribed and find out that there is justification for that.
Cannabis was used in the Middle East for thousands of years as medicine. Who knows, maybe for other things as well. Many of the tribes at the time used cannabis. Assyrians used it for medicine, used it for excitation, as used it in religion. The Egyptians used it as medicine.
So I have the honor of introducing Professor Mahmoud ElSohly, and he's my colleague in many ways, friend, recent author of and editor of Cannabis, Chemistry and Biology Fundamentals, released actually just this past Monday. And he's also a fellow botanist. You should know that all of the plants essentially that have been tested by the federal government over the last 40 years have come from his farms at the University of Mississippi. So I'd like to hand it over now to Dr. ElSohly.
Dr. ElSohly, this is Gene Jones. If I could get you to launch your program, please, sir.
I can't turn the video on.
Hang on one second. So,
Okay.
looks like we've got your video off, Dr. ElSohly. I'm looking on the monitor.
Yeah, it's from your side though. Because I'm trying to get my video on, but it says that you can't start your video because the host has stopped it. So if you unstop it, I can do my video. So ask David. Oh, okay, hold on.
Hang on one second, sir.
Okay.
Try it in now, sir.
Okay. Okay, now I
There we
think
go.
I'm on. Okay. Very good. Well, I think there is a glare behind me, so let me do the shade so. I think that's better. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I am Mahmoud ElSohly. I am a research professor here at the University of Mississippi and professor of pharmaceutics and drug delivery. And it's a pleasure for me to be with you today. Dr. Block reached out to me to join in this meeting, and I'm glad to be with you this morning. Okay, can you put my slides on? Hey, Eugene, can you put my slides on?
Sir, I thought we were going to share your screen.
Oh, well, I can do that too, but let me see.
I've got your slides as a backup, so if we need to, we're going to pull them.
Okay, well, I have my slides here now if you want.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, share screen.
Okay. Okay, you see it now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Let me see here. Already. Well, you know, the title of my talk today is Cannabis Sativa, an old plant with much renewed interest. And as you have heard in the previous presentations, it really is an old plant that has been prescribed for so many indications. And of course, you know, today there is a tremendous interest in the cannabis plant and what it can do and how it can be used for the betterness of human health. I'm going to start out with a picture of Professor Meshulam, and I'm glad that I joined earlier to see and hear other speakers speak about different things. And I think because of that, between what Dr. Troutt, talked about and what Dr. Block talked about and so on, I think some of the slides that I have, I can go through these very quickly so we can save some time, because I understand that we are running out of time. But Professor Meshulam and I go a long way ever since I started back into this area in 1976. And I have known him, since then, and he has made a tremendous impact on my life and my career. And for that, I'm very much, grateful. And I pray for the good Lord to treat him right in heavens and bless his soul. Let me see here. Okay, so we're going to start out with very quickly on the cannabis botany, just not to give you a lecture on cannabis and the botanical aspects of it, but just to remind you that the cannabis plant is a dioecious plant, meaning you have male plants and female plants. And people think that the male plants don't have cannabinoids, but they actually do. But as you can see, the difference between the male and the female plants, the male plants don't really have as much biomass, and they don't have as much THC or cannabinoids as the female plants. Not only that, but we also have the fiber type plants, which is traditionally the industrial hemp was used mainly for seeds and fiber, and now the drug type cannabis, which is used for the psychological properties and for the medicine. But now we're seeing that the fiber type, the CBD type of plants are the ones that are of maybe much more interest today. I had some, slides on the botanical aspects of this, but I think it was covered by Dr. Troutt. And not only the sequence of belonging of the cannabis plant into the now we say that cannabis is a plant that belongs to a family that has only one genus and one species, and that species is species Sativa, but it's a highly variable species. We have the debate that has been going on between Cannabis sativa, Cannabis ruderalis, and so on, 2 species, 3 species, multiple species. But then in the final analysis, the common belief now and the common acceptance in the scientific community that cannabis is a plant that belongs to one family, one genus, and that genus has only one species, and that species is species Sativa, but is highly variable, that you can have different subspecies like Sativa subspecies Sativa, Sativa subspecies Indica, subspecies Ruderalis, and so on. And then Dr. Russo was interviewed regarding that debate of the cannabis, the species debate in there. And he basically indicated that really we should not look at the cannabis plant the way it looks, or whether it's Sativa or Indica, but rather on the chemistry and the cannabinoid and the terpenoid profile of the plant material to describe, what it is. Now, we have, I serve on the United States Pharmacopoeia expert panel on cannabis, and the proceedings of the meetings that we have was published in an article in the Journal of Natural Products, which is a very highly respectable publication. In there, we talked about the chemotypes, and we talked about the quality attributes that the plant should have, or the products coming out of the plant should have, that will make it to be a reasonably, good medicine. And you can see that the final analysis, and I think it was also mentioned by Dr. Troutt, that we have really basically 3 chemovars. We call them chemotypes or chemovars, and that is the high THC, low CBD chemovar, the high CBD, low THC chemovar, which is commonly known as the fiber type or the hemp type, and then the intermediate, which has a balance between the THC and the CBD. Now, this is again not to give you bore you with the botany, but to let you know that all those chemical constituents that the plant is known for, the cannabinoids and the terpenes, are housed or found in the glandular trichomes of the plant, that you can see those structures in here, and some of the botanical characteristics like the cystolith hair that you have over here, that has the calcium carbonate at the bottom of that cystolith hair, that makes it a very distinguishable aspect of powdered plant material to see, yes, this is a powder of cannabis plant or not. I'm going to give you very quickly on the growing, harvesting, and processing of the plant material to produce standardized marijuana that we are using in the drug supply program here in the US. Cultivations indoor and outdoors, and then we have the micropropagation of the plant, which is really a very good way of keeping the genetic material that you have. You start out with a plant that you have. We had several protocols before. That's a two-stage protocol, three-stage protocol, but then now we have a one-stage protocol. We actually take a piece of the growing apex of the plant, and then you start that and you put it into tissue culture, and you go from that all the way to a full plant in one step without having to transplant anything from one condition to the other, but end up with the rooted and shooted plant, and then you transfer that into soil, you make the plant, and then you even take it outdoors to have the final plant. This is a very good way to keep the genetic material in what we refer to as synthetic seeds, that you take the apical nodes of the plant and you preserve those, cryopreserve those, and then when you need them, you bring them out and you bring them to life, and you propagate them into full plants. What I want to bring to your attention is, even though these are synthetic seeds and micropropagated plants that keep wanted to show you that it does actually keep the same genetic material as the mother plant. And we did that by looking at the photosynthetic characteristics, and we can see no difference in there. We do a comparison of the pigment content, chlorophyll and otherwise, and there is no difference there. It's the same thing. And then we also do comparison of the genetic characteristics, looking at the DNA in the micropropagated plants versus the mother plant, and they have the exact same profile. And then we also look at the cannabinoid content of those micropropagated plants, and we see that all the major cannabinoids that you see there, THCV, CBD, CBC, and so on, they have the same level from the micropropagated plants versus the in vivo propagated plants. Now, growing indoors, of course, you can do that in soil, you can do that hydroponically, and you get some really nice and healthy plants. We've done that in our grow room, or you can actually produce large amounts of material in that grow room, but not. Of course, we have at the University of Mississippi, we have most of our production is outdoors. But we do have indoor facility where we actually produce small amounts of material, maybe 5-10 kilos of plant material under certain conditions with certain potencies that is required by the drug supply program. Those buds that come out from indoor grown materials are not really very big buds, but nonetheless they have very outdoor. Though we have back in, I think it was 2014 when we really had a big production outdoors. All the plants that you see here on that slide are actually produced from vegetatively propagated plants, that is to say cuttings, so that all the plants that you see there have the exact same genetics that we were looking for. This is the same field at maturity. You can see all the plants are female plants. You see the buds there ready to be harvested. And then we go through the harvesting processing process that we bring the plant material in, put them in the drying barn, dried overnight very quickly, cleaned up, remove all the dead leaves and stems and so on, and then end up with the final buds that you can see here. And you can see the difference between the size of those buds grown outdoors versus the size of the buds grown indoors. Nonetheless, they all have the same exact chemical composition and chemical profile. This is the final product that we harvest at the end, and it looks, obviously it looks different than what you see in the dispensaries, because in the dispensaries they actually harvest the buds, small buds, and they manicure those to the nth degree, where you could really have very fine part of the inner core of the bud. But in our case, that will be used to manufacture marijuana cigarettes for research. And I'll maybe talk about that later on, or if there is a question about that. But anyway, this is what the way our plant material looks in the top left corner. This one right here. This is the final product that is a powdered plant material, but coarse powder that includes larger leaves, medium leaves, fine structures, and therefore the potency is not as high as what you get if you just take the inner core of the cannabis bud that will have the highest THC content. You might or might not know that in the cannabis plant, the THC content and the outside of the plant, the larger leaf is, the lower the THC or the cannabinoid content is, and therefore, as you get closer to the inner core of the bud, that's where the highest THC content is. Because we need to have material with large enough particle size to manufacture cigarettes that just not powder, we can't make a cigarette out of powder, then we have to harvest and process the plant material with a mixture of all the different components of the leafy structures of the plant. Out of what we produce, we have the plant material for manufacturing cigarettes, which go into the drug supply program. Who manufactures extracts, you can see on the bottom right. Those extracts are basically like tarry looking materials, but they are rich in cannabinoids. The THC variety might produce up to maybe 70% THC in those extracts, and the CBD maybe 55% CBD. And then we also, produce CBD and THC for the drug supply program to be used by investigators in their studies. Okay, well, I think I'm not going to speak too much about the history of the cannabis use here, because I think it's been elaborated too by Dr. Troutt and also mentioned by Dr. Block. And but needless to say that it was actually the cannabis extract was in the United States Pharmacopoeia for a long time, until it was the Marijuana Act came in 1937, and it became Schedule I later on, and all of that. But the use of cannabis is really very, very well established. And as Dr. Black showed on the segment that he showed, that there is the plant has been prescribed for so many indications in the past and years ago. And now with the understanding of the cannabinoid receptors and where they're located in the body and what they do and the activity of the THC and the CBD and all of this and the different parts of the human body, explains a lot of the indications for which cannabis has been prescribed years ago. United States Pharmacopoeia that was showed actually some of those cannabis preparations has been approved for use by humans. And you can see here in this slide the doses that were prescribed both for the plant material on top and the extract on the bottom. That was assuming a 3% THC content of the plant based on the amount of the powder plant and the amount of the extract. It would be about, if you assume 3%, it's about 1 to 2 milligrams of THC per dose, which is, I believe, is a very reasonable dose to get pharmacological activity that is of benefit to the individual, but not necessarily to produce a terrible high and a side effect associated with that. Okay, now Some of the established or potential medical benefits of the cannabis is, of course, I think most of you in this audience are very familiar with that: the nausea and vomiting, appetite, spasticity, seizures, inflammation, pain, and so on. All of these things, the cannabis plant could be very beneficial in treating or mitigating some of those conditions. And of course, the other thing that we have heard, this morning about is the treatment or mitigation of cancer in some patients. And there are quite a number of physicians around the country that really swear by the activity of cannabis in the treatment of cancer. They show the doses really to be a very high doses, but anyways, I think we need to have more rigorous studies, placebo-controlled studies, to show how effective that is. It might be a very good medicine for that. The history of the evolution of the state medical cannabis programs, I think most of you also are familiar with that. The first wave started back in 1996, 99, with some states joining in there. And then the early legislative initiatives, 2000 to 2008, the more states, joined, and more explicit allowances on sources and supplies, and then expanding the variety of product types that are made available. And also the revenue streams for state governments were established and became an incentive for more states to legalize the medical use of cannabis. Now, in the second generation of legislation, not 2009 till the present, another more states joined the effort in making comprehensive medical programs and regulating growers and distributors and dispensaries. And there is a growing focus now on testing and labeling, growing dependence on revenue streams, and migration of many medical marijuana states to recreational, which is, I think a good number of states right now do have both medical and recreation, as shown on this slide right here. And the states that have the dark green are the ones that have both medical and recreational, while the light green are the ones that only have medical. And of course, some states are only allowing the hemp type production and the hemp type programs, but nonetheless, I think most of the country now is ready to allow the use of cannabis for medical purposes. Now, I want to tell you a little bit about the NIDA drug supply program. This is the program that we have at the University of Mississippi that up until maybe a couple of years ago, we're the only facility that was allowed to have a license to produce marijuana for research. And that's given to NIDA, and NIDA will distribute that to investigators. But then DEA finally allowed other growers to apply for a license to produce cannabis for research. And I think right now maybe there's 7 or 8 growers that have applied for that registration, and they were awarded that registration. I'm not sure how many of them are actually applied for the NIDA contract that just was advertised in November. But anyways, the outcome of that application and the process of selecting a manufacturer, we received that. We just got that in April for another 5 years, which is pretty much a feather in our hat, because people have been critical of what we do and how we do things, not really understanding exactly what our mission is and what we're supposed to do. Nonetheless, I took it very kindly and very nicely without being offended by some of that criticism. But I'm here to tell you that we can provide investigators around the country with anything and everything that they might want to have. But I will maybe elaborate on this a little bit more. But basically, we are producing all the cannabis plant material for research. We're manufacturing under good manufacturing practices by the FDA. We're registered as drug manufacturing with the FDA, manufactured with the DEA, and we have produced not only plant material but extracts of different types, high THC extracts, high CBD extracts, intermediate extracts, and also provided pure cannabinoids for research, both non-GMP, which could only be used for animal research, but also GMP that actually the CBD that we produce for NIDA and for the FDA is a material that was used by the FDA to show that CBD does not have an abuse potential. So these are the products that we have in the program, the plant material on the top left, as I showed before, the cigarettes, the extracts, and the pure cannabinoids. Okay. I don't know, it froze. Okay, these are some of the plant material that we have now. We have, CBD plant material that has, as much as maybe 20% CBD or so, but not very much material. But most of the material in the CBD varieties that we have is, around 5 to 8%. But we do have some real higher CBD content plant material. We also have the THC, plant material. We have inventory on our drug supply program that has any variations that you can have just looking at those tables, and I don't really expect you to digest this very much, but suffice to say that we have a lot of different types of plant materials with different levels of delta-9 THC and CBD content. Now, we have recently started producing, varieties with or chemovars, the high THC chemovars with much higher THC content. You have here all the way to almost 30% THC, 20% THC, or 15 or 23. So we can provide the investigators, the clinicians, with any type of material similar to the ones that are available in any dispensary around the country. And I actually did a study, and I did not, show the slide for that, but that showed that the material that we produce, I looked at the cannabinoid profile of materials that are available in dispensaries versus the confiscated materials versus what we produce. And I can tell you that all the THC-rich plant material from all the different places around the country and the material that we produce have very, very similar cannabinoid profile, and therefore there is really no distinction between what's available in any dispensary than what we are actually producing here at the University of Mississippi for the drug supply program.
Dr. ElSohly, this is Gene Jones. I hate to do this to you, sir, but I still got to get Dr. Block on the program. I need to get you to wrap it up.
Okay, well, you only given me 15 minutes, but anyways, you told me 30 minutes, but you gave me 15, but can I take another maybe 5 minutes to wrap up? Yes? Anyway, so I'll try to finish very quickly, but we do have different types of extracts available for investigators to do their studies. And we have pure cannabinoids that we have for doing new research with those materials. But then I'm going to skip through those next two slides very quickly because, again, it was mentioned by Dr. Troutt, and that's the complexity of the plant material, how much the different types of components in there, and then mainly the main active constituent of the plant are the cannabinoids, which belong to so many different classes. There is 129 cannabinoids right now, but only those 6 that you see on that slide are the ones that really of great importance in the program that are used by everybody. Again, this slide right here, which is the cannabinoid biosynthesis. I think Dr. Block showed that too, which basically everything starts from geranyl pyrophosphate and olivethoric acid, going all the way to making cannabigerolic acid, which from there different enzymes convert that to different cannabinoids and so on, as Dr. Block mentioned. Now, We have been analyzing I think this is very important for this audience to know. We've been analyzing, plant material around the country from confiscated material, and we have published quite a bit on that. These are some of those products that are on the market. Other products here, this one's here, and all of these things show basically the tendency or the change in the potency of cannabis over, over time, starting in the early 90s to now, from about 4% to now about 16%. And then CBD, CBD just remained pretty much stable around 0.4, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5%, not very much change. And that shows that the ratio between the THC and CBD in the confiscated material has been changing from about 15 to 1 to about 100, to 1 or so in the latest potencies. Then we have the 2018 Farm Bill that changed things quite a bit, and I think are you familiar with that? So I'm not going to elaborate on that, but suffice to say that this resulted in some of the products on the market today that are assumed to be legal, assumed to be coming out from hemp, but really they are not coming from hemp, which is like the Delta 8 THC, which is flooding the market, today. And you just look at this is a CBD product that's on the market. That you look at the chromatogram of that, the CBD is this. I mean, the Delta 8 THC on the market is the major component, but there's so many impurities here that appear on those commercial products containing CBD. So what we're doing is, what we have done is we have isolated, those impurities, and the chemical structures. Again, I don't want you to expect you to. There's so many different cannabinoids that show up as impurities in the Delta 8 products on the market. And we have analyzed those, and we have looked at 21 different products on the market, and we can see that most of those impurities are present at different levels in different products on the market. We are not identifying what products these are, but suffice to say that the Delta 8 content was only, like maybe the maximum is 70% or so, but the rest of the material is actually impurities that need to be identified and need to be studied in terms of their pharmacological activity. Now, also the manufacturers indicated that there is no Delta 9 THC in there, but you can see now here's the manufacturer, percent of the Delta 8 THC, and the Delta 9 THC, you can see that is really much, much higher than the 0.3% that is supposed to be the limit for them to claim it as a hemp related product.
Dr. ElSohly, this is Gene. I hate to do this to you, sir, but we're going to have to.
Very good. This is my last slide here. I just wanted to, this is the slide that shows the book that just came out that Dr. Block mentioned. And I want to say that Dr. Jeffrey Block is the one who had the first chapter in that book, and he did a great job, and I appreciate his effort. And I think now it's time for Dr. Block to get on the podium. He is, I think Moriah gave a very good presentation on him. Thank you so much, and I appreciate being with you.
Thank you, Dr. ElSohly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. ElSohly. We're a little behind. I promise you'll all go have your coffee break and see the exhibitors. I will tell you that when the schedule was set up for this, my only request to our conference organizer, Gene Jones, was please don't have me speak after the coffee break. It's like herding cats when you guys are over there to come back. So thanks for your patience for just a few minutes. This is Dr. ElSohly's book released on Monday, Cannabis Chemistry and Biology Fundamentals. If any of the things he said there were not either as clear or time efficient, you'll find what you need to have here. So thank you for the comment there about the opening chapter, Mahmoud. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover some of my content here as not to run over too long. And tomorrow morning with the closing session, I'll conclude with some slides I wanted to speak about really the chemistry that leads to a black, gray, and legal market. And this is really important to understand the differences because we've seen all of them. We have all of them at this time here in Florida. Just in terms of the attestations, this is the standard sheet when you do, and you're a program director for an ACCM accredited talk. It's very important to realize the box I have there talks about if I'm talking about something that's off-label. Well, the reality is with Schedule 1 of cannabis, everything by definition is off-label. That's my disclaimer. Everything I say is off-label. So with that in mind, I have no other affiliations from which to prepare conflicts for you. Cannabis around the world, including where Dr. ElSohly comes from, China, certainly Hippocrates shown there in Greece, as well as the Middle East and in the India subcontinent. These are all the fathers of cannabinoid medicine and medicine in general in their respective cultures around the world. Why were they regarded that way? Because they documented their findings. It wasn't just hearsay. This was written down that you can go back and find, which is why there's a history of 6,000 years of documented use. So we've had the concerns here of what happens with organized medicine. And I'm not just talking Florida Medical, like I showed you the cartoon earlier, but the AMA, because in 2023, it's still the mission statement of the AMA to bring together physicians and communities to improve the nation's health. But in 1937, the AMA also was confronted with cannabis because that's the year of the Marijuana Tax Act. And here's what was said there on the floor of the House of Representatives by William C. Woodward. He's an MD, but he's also a JD. And he spoke about the Marijuana Tax Act. And he wanted to publicly dispel any impression that either the AMA or enlightened medical opinions sponsored the new law's politicized rationale. He also said that the AMA encourages unfettered scientific research and education, and that cannabis's medicinal use should be regarded as, this is in 1937, an unknown quantity, but might have important uses in medicine and psychology. The fact is, cannabis's political associations still bring pernicious side effects that undermine its medical research and education. Thank you for everybody for being here for that reason. This is where the supporting science evolved to in January of 2017. The National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's report complemented the previous report by the same entity that used to be known before as the Institute of Medicine. They gave their first report on cannabis in 1999, barely 6 years after the discovery of the endogenous chemicals, the ligands that I said before, really defined how endocannabinoids work. Those of you may have picked up this card. I provided that, and I'm just giving you the basic lowdown with references on the bottom and mentioning what the federal government and the study I just showed you, which was a federally commissioned meta-analysis study, showed what it really works for with at least having substantial or conclusive evidence-based data. And it was limited to, but this is important, there are medical uses with that degree of certainty as far as statistical evidence. THC has its best evidence and efficacy for chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, chronic pain, and multiple sclerosis, muscle spasms, adding to that CBD with, of course, intractable epilepsy. There's 4 things right there that have substantial or evidence-based data that is conclusive. Everything else at this point is truly anecdotal, but that's at this time. What I'm pointing out is the process. It's not a moment in time where you suddenly can say it works for even all 10 of Florida's qualifying conditions. That's the reality of where it is. And on the flip side of the card, shows the formularies that have been available. From the top to the bottom on the left column tells you what they are, but the right column is the DEA scheduling. Please pay careful attention to that. Things have changed. And the bottom column, the bottom row, is cannabidiol. And right now it's descheduled, but that was Schedule 1 just a few years ago, moved down to Schedule 5. And then with 1 year on Schedule 5, in I believe 2020, it was descheduled as evidence of not simply efficacy, which we know at least for those epileptic seizures, but also in this case for its safety profile, which was very different, of course, than THC. So then moving right along, this is really where the efficacy can be best seen. The graph on the right shows what's called an inverted U. And this is what happens with cannabis when used for some kinds of pain. It happens to be very effective for neuropathic pain, kind of pain that comes from nerves. But again, pain is not just one thing. It's not a diagnosis really at all. It's a symptom of many diseases and injuries. And not all pain necessarily, if you think about it in that context, being simply an intolerable symptom is necessarily even physical. Pain in that sense of being an intolerable symptom, I believe the way people use cannabis is also for psychologically intolerable symptoms or even spiritually intolerable things. The fact is the inverted U in this case shows that little bit in the beginning, not enough, no real impact. Give a little more, you get a sweet spot at the top of that U. But more than that, not only a return in some pain syndromes to a baseline, but sometimes even below, where pain can be perceived as even be worse. If you're purely focused on pain and not distracted to do the other things, then in fact, sometimes it can make things worse for some people with some kinds of pain. So where does that bring us about the plant itself today and the legal parts of this? Well, cannabis sativa, as we said, has oversight through the FDA, but their job is to look at safety and efficacy in terms of the use abuse potential, while the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, talks about the risks versus benefits, but in terms of it being prohibited versus being controlled. Those are different categories. Prohibited being Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are various degrees of controlling it as far as the legal definition. So that's just cannabis. But what we have is other medicines that are Schedule 2, which we don't think about necessarily this way, but these are controlled substances that are legal. Opium, most people may not even know that cocaine is legal. It's used in ear, nose, and throat surgery every day because it's a local anesthetic that also acts as a vasoconstrictor. So ear, nose, and throat surgery, putting it in the nose mitigates nosebleeds rather than having to combine a local anesthetic with, say, adrenaline, like dentists do. And anybody who's ever had a dental shot with adrenaline and feel your heart racing, sometimes it's not a very pleasant side effect. That doesn't generally happen the same way with cocaine when used medically in the right setting. How about other botanical medicines, if we're going to call it? Tobacco is the biggest offender at all, but it's part of culture. More preventable deaths in the world by far from tobacco than anything we're talking about today, including opioids. And then there are things that are also botanical in the sense that do influence endorphins. And chocolate and coffee are both rather habit forming and, addicting to a sense, but they're part of culture. And that's what I'm trying to bring up. I grow coffee and chocolate in my backyard because they're available that way. So as far as the systems that they work within, what people think when they think of endorphins or endocannabinoids, there's actually 3 different groups of receptors. We have them in all of us that have been identified by plants. And the first that we just mentioned was going to be opioids from the opium poppy that way back, 1974, when I'm finishing high school, was when endorphins were first described. And so now we knew how the opium poppy and opioids worked endogenously in the system. And we've learned a lot about how to use different types of opioids, some of which have different side effects of the other. Buprenorphine, even Kratom, which we were talking about a little bit yesterday, works through endorphins that way with different effects and potential side effects than the opium poppy. Endocannabinoids were in 1992. That was Professor Meshulam's contribution to the science in terms of cannabis, with cannabis being the very plant that identified the receptor system that we have in all of us. And then later in 1997, endovaniloids are actually very important in terms of our perception of pain, particularly heat-induced type pain symptoms and signs from the very plant that identified it and studying it, which was the chili pepper. So the fact is these 3 endogenous systems were not known about until the 21st century or late 20th, 21st century. And yet you can go back before the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937, and companies such as Parke-Davis here produced this medicine called chlorodyne. And I want to tell you a little about this a moment because it's fascinating that in the 19th and 20th century, without knowing how these worked, the pharmaceutical companies already knew that they could use plant extracts and combine them in small doses together in combination to impact each of those 3 systems that I just finished telling you is part of how we interpret pain. And what are they? Well, you can see right here in the bottle, if you could read that small, it's morphine, cannabis, and capsaicin right there, before they even knew that endorphins, endocannabinoids, and endovaniloids were what were really doing it. And as good as this was and effective for pain, it was known to be and marketed by many companies, including Parke-Davis, it was also abused. It was sometimes overdosed. Several bottles you might find at the bedside of someone as a suicidal thing. So it's not to say there's no risk, but to say that when you combine smaller doses of each of those three components interacting with endogenous systems that complement each other, there's a synergy of using smaller amounts for safer outcomes instead of using one by itself in larger amounts. So moving then right along, the discovery of endocannabinoid receptors was in rats, 1988, and Mishulin's lab later on in 1992 and 3 found the plant's molecules up top there, delta 9 THC and cannabidiol. If you can see that little diagram, they look very different than what's in animals at the bottom of the slide. Biochemically, and the molecular structures of anandamide and 2-AG, which are on the bottom, are different. So people say, well, how could these work in human receptors? It's actually not as much the design of the molecule as the solubility. I want to tell you that cannabinoids work through a lipid system, a fat system. Fats and water don't mix. You know that. Oil, vinegar don't mix. So in the body, most plant medicines that we're commonly familiar with are alkaloids that are water soluble. This is different. So in fact, if you look at really what's the secret with why cannabis chemicals work the way they do, is they have almost identical solubilities. And that makes them interact in a lipid environment where the synapse is where all the activity is from nerve to nerve for that transmission. Wanted to bring that up. It's an important biological and biochemical difference with cannabinoids. And I'm going to wrap things up in a moment just to give you some insight to how old, primitive, and how endogenous this system really is. This is me sitting with a original first edition of Charles Darwin's Origin of the Species. I'm a book and a history nut. That's why Dr. ElSohly asked me to write the first chapter in his book about the history of cannabis. But this isn't only the history of cannabis. This is the history of all living things. And that's where Darwin comes in. So this next slide looks pretty complicated. I know some of the print is too small, but the purpose of the slide is to show you on the left that endocannabinoids are far, far, far older than what are called phyto or plant-derived cannabinoids. To the order of plant cannabinoids have only been around for a blip in history, 30, 60 million years. Might seem like a lot, unless you realize that the earliest evidence of endocannabinoids are not only in humans. I mean, we've only been around a few 100,000 years at best, but all vertebrates have it. Fish have it. Okay, so now we're going back not only through vertebrates, but it's even been found in invertebrates right here in Tampa Bay. Okay, Greg Gerdeman's work found that. So I'm pointing out that this is to the order of 500 million years of evolution of how we're all hardwired with these endocannabinoids that manage and keep us in physiologic balance. All receptor systems functions are subordinate to the actions of endocannabinoids. All are subordinate to endocannabinoids without exception. That's what that's what our bodies are doing with this. So why are endocannabinoids and where we are so important? It is, as I just mentioned, it's a physiologic balance, but I like this slide because it shows the scales of legal justice, right? We had our legislator. See, this is really what it's about. So you're used to seeing it, but when you see it balanced on a cannabis leaf, it's got other meanings as well. And those meanings are homeostasis. That's the fancy word for balance. We talk about it physiologically, what keeps us there so that when something naturally happens to us, it doesn't kill us outright. We have ways of compensating. And the thing that fascinates me most is really not even CB1 receptors, which are in the brain, but CB2 receptors. That's part of the immune system. The action of CB2 receptors really are what defines what allows a disease to become chronic. When each of us die, we're going to die with one diagnosis of cause of death on our death certificate. But at that time, we actually will have many different diseases that our bodies have held in check. The reason that can happen is because of effective endocannabinoids that keep those diseases from killing us outright and allow them to become chronic. So the real miracle in this is that CB2 receptors in particular have defined the mechanism of disease that allows us to understand what is the mechanism of disease chronicity. That's really important, keeps us in the game. And then the final balance I want to bring up is something we've talked about here, one-to-ones, the balance between THC and CBD. I am critical of the modern plant because it's generally lost that through breeding since prohibition. I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow. But for this particular finish, wrap up now, I want to just remind you that the real target of research and what you should be looking at is not the leaf and the plant. As any archer knows, if you're trying to hit the target's the endocannabinoid, ECS, in the middle there. If an archer has their gaze away from the target, now they start thinking or looking at what's at the tip of the arrow, which is why I put that little cannabis leaf there. It's more likely they're going to hit misses. And that particular statement in the article where that picture came from is basically modulating the endocannabinoid system in human health, in disease, successes and failures. This paper was important, it came out of the NIH, but not by PhD researchers only, by MD PhD researchers, Hal Packer and George Kunos. And they made this particularly remarkable statement in 2013, modulating endocannabinoid system activity may have therapeutic potential in almost all diseases affecting humans. Very powerful statement there, isn't it? Almost all diseases affecting humans. That doesn't mean we know how to do that now. That doesn't mean there's evidence-based data for 6 of the 10 qualifying conditions here in Florida, but that's the potential. The mechanism from brain to gut is all done through that system. These are some of the things it handles. And so then looking at risks and things like that, I went through this slide yesterday. Cannabis has a great safety profile because it doesn't stop you from breathing. And this will be my last slide. Like anandamide and Delta-9 THC and Delta-8, they're partial agonists of the CB1 receptor. And this is where THC is activated in different areas of the brain. But where is it missing? The part of the brain that controls respiration. And that's the brainstem there. That's why this will not cause what fentanyl is causing for so many opioid overdose deaths. I'll continue from different material tomorrow. Thanks for your time and enjoy the coffee break.